Hey everyone, my name is Alec with Inside the Arena, bringing you a special off-season edition of MASL Midweek, where we will be talking about everyone's favorite topic, expansion. Of course, discussions about expansion happen all the time between us arena soccer fans. We talk about rumors about where the league is going to expand. We talk about where we want the league to expand. And I hope this video will allow us to continue those discussions, but I also hope to bring some new dynamics and some new angles to those discussions. Specifically, I want to talk about why we should be expanding. Everyone talks about expansion in a positive light, but why is that? I also want to talk about some caveats and some rules that should be in place for when the league does expand. And this is something that I feel like has been discussed more often as of late, but I want to continue that discussion even further. And then finally, I want to talk about what a strategic expansion plan would look like, which of course means talking about where the league should expand, but it also means talking about where the league should not expand, at least for now. So in this video, I'm going to present my ideas about these topics, but I really hope that all of you will comment down below on YouTube, as well as on Facebook when we post the link there, so that we can have a discussion about this. It's the off season. We've got to talk about something. Why not talk about expansion? And before we get started with anything, I do want to remind you that I am not a business person. I am not a sports management person. That is not the career path that I have been on and not the career path that I am currently on. I just love arena soccer. I want to advocate for it as much as possible. I want to have discussions with other arena soccer fans, which is the real goal of this video. But do understand, when I share these ideas, they are not coming from someone who really knows what they're talking about. They're just coming from a diehard fan. So let's start off by talking about why the league should expand. And I have already asked some of you on Facebook why you think the league should expand. And I was able to kind of boil this down to a few different points about why the league should expand. Some of that is coming from you, some of it is coming from me. The first point I'll bring up is that it increases the league's footprint. It expands the league as a brand, gets more people taking part in arena soccer, watching it. It brings more players into the league. All stuff that is very positive. The second point is that it will help to limit travel costs for the teams that already exist. We know that some teams are not in the best spot geographically right now. They have to travel very far for pretty much all of their away games. That's not too great for them, and it's really not great for the other teams when they have to travel to that team to play them. So adding some expansion franchises can allow us to fill in some of the gaps that we currently have in the map, which will theoretically reduce the travel costs for teams and allow them to be more financially stable as they move into the future. Now, those are the two main overarching reasons that I saw from a lot of you when I asked you why the league should expand. But there is one more point that I thought of that I don't think I saw from as many of you, and that reason is to fill a market that would do really well with arena soccer. And I know it's hard to say which markets will latch on to arena soccer and which ones won't. But if there's a market out there that seems to be prime territory for arena soccer, it's not the worst idea to take advantage of that and put a team there. Now, ideally, you're going to have some overlap there. You're going to find a market that is itching for an arena soccer team that also helps to reduce travel costs. It helps to expand the league's footprint. But I do think that filling a market niche that is there is its own reason in itself. Okay, so now we know some reasons that the league should expand. Let's now talk about some caveats and some rules that should be in place for the league and for expansion teams as they enter the league. The first little caveat for expansion is something that relates to the league itself. And it's a point that a lot of you brought up when I asked you why the league should expand. And it's something I totally agree with. And that is that, especially right now, the league should be more focused on stabilizing the teams that it currently has than bringing in new teams. Expansion is great, but it doesn't mean much if you're expanding at the same rate or a lesser rate than you are losing teams. So as I said, right now especially, we're dealing with the pandemic and teams taking a financial hit because of that. I want to see the league taking steps to help those teams in any way that it can. The biggest goal would be to help those teams get more fans in the stands, but anything right now to help the existing teams out would be great. I brought this point up in my season ending video. Right now, the league's focus should be on stabilizing the teams that it has. And when I start talking about my expansion plan, which my expansion plan starts a couple years down the line, this should be an ongoing effort. The teams that the league currently has and the teams that the league adds in the future, it should be an ongoing effort to help those teams out, keep them financially viable, and that should be a focus of the league, even as it also starts to spend some of its attention on expanding. The other point that the league should keep in mind is the opposite of expansion, retraction. And I'm not talking about teams that hit a financial wall and can't continue and they fold. That's a beast in itself. But are there any teams that the league should drop? Teams that the league does not want to be associated with anymore. And I know a lot of you right now are thinking about Turlock. I've always had a soft spot for Turlock. I know that they're definitely the odd team out when it comes to the facility that they play in, but I've always thought the team represented the league pretty well, outside of them playing in a warehouse pretty much. Overall, the team is fine. I haven't really had that many issues with them. They've been in the league forever. They're one of the longest tenured teams in the league. So I don't really have that much of an issue with Turlock, although I think there is a discussion to be had there if the league should keep Turlock in its ranks. The team that I think about more, and I know some of you think about this team as well, is Florida. Florida, I think we can all agree, has taken some steps that has damaged the league. Rather, it's paying obscene amounts of money to bring in all the best players to their team, while seemingly not spending much money to actually get fans into the stands or putting on a decent production when they broadcast their games. I think many of us would agree that Florida last season had some of the worst broadcasts in the league. They had some decent ones in there, but they also had some real clunkers. They also play on a field that, to me, looks terrible. The old football lines on there just doesn't look good. That's probably the smallest of the concerns about Florida. But I think a lot of us have issues with Florida and how that team is being run right now. And I know some people have already said that if they were in charge of the league, they would kick Florida out. And as a matter of fact, for the purposes of my expansion plan, when we get to that, we're going to assume that Florida is no longer in the league. Rather, that's because they finally run out of money because they spend way too much of it trying to bring in the best players in the league only to not even make the championship, or if it's because the league kicks them out. Regardless of what happens, for my expansion plan, we're going to assume that Florida does not exist. We will assume that Turlock exists, though. The final little caveat and rule that I would put in place for the league itself is how many teams they should expand to each year, or when they do expand. And I think the limit on that should be right about 2 teams. And the reason I say that is when the league does expand, I would like to see the league itself putting some resources and some effort into building that team up in its local community. And in order for that to be viable, the league can't be splitting its attention all over the place. So I think having 2 teams at most per year is where the league should be settling. Now, I will say, if there is a team in M2 that wants to move up to the top division, I would not count them towards those 2 teams. And you're going to see when I talk about my strategy for expansion, I take advantage of that little nuance in my rule a few times. If an M2 team moves up, they're not going to count towards those 2 teams. Along similar lines, I think the league should have a year gap between every expansion franchise that they add, or since they can add 2 per year, there'd be a year gap between every 2 expansion franchises that they add. Again, this is just so the league can focus on nurturing those new, young franchises and they don't have to divide their attention among all sorts of new franchises. Okay, so those are some little rules and some caveats that the league, I think, should keep in mind when it comes to expansion. What about the expansion teams themselves? Well, there's a lot of things in place that have already been talked about when it comes to arena size and whatnot. And for the purposes of this video, we're going to assume that the teams can find a viable arena where they're going to be located. We're also going to assume that those teams have solid ownership. And I know that is a big assumption to have in arena soccer, but it does exist. There are some teams out there right now that have fantastic owners and are really helping out the sport and their team. So we're going to assume that the teams that I talk about in my strategic expansion plan, that they all find a solid owner or a solid group of owners. The rule, though, that I want to talk about is something that I think is getting more and more steam within our arena soccer community. Because a lot of you are saying that when a team is added to the league, they should have to spend a year in M2 before they move up to the top division. And I halfway agree with that. I do not like teams announcing their existence in summer and then just a few months later starting to play games. I don't think that gives you enough time to really integrate yourself into the community and market yourself and build up a fan base. It sets a team up for failure. So I'm totally on board with saying when a team is added to the league, they have to wait a year before they can start playing. And they have to use that year to market themselves and integrate themselves into their community. Gives them more time to build up those community connections and hopefully a fan base, maybe even a lot of season ticket holders for when they actually start to play. Where I get off board with what a lot of people are saying is that the league should have to play in M2. And I understand the logic that M2 allows a team to prove itself, that they can actually put butts in the seats. My concern with that, though, is that it really kind of relies on M2 itself expanding and becoming more stable. Because right now M2 is very Midwestern focused, and my concern is that if you bring in a team that is not in the Midwest and you make them play in M2 for a year, if they're really far away, those travel costs are really going to hurt the team. It probably would have made more sense to invest those resources in branding themselves, marketing themselves, and becoming integrated into the community. I also don't like it because I don't think it's great for M2 to have teams entering and leaving all the time. Now that being said, if a team wants to spend that year, it's almost like a probationary year, if you will. If they want to spend that year playing in M2, I'm cool with that. I think that is a way to integrate yourself into the community. But I think it should be the team's choice if they play in M2 or not. As I said, the team should have to be in existence at least a year before they start to play. But in my mind, they should not have to play in M2. I'll also say that the league should have some requirements in place as to what the team does to market itself and integrate itself into the community. I don't really know what those requirements would look like, but I don't want another Toronto/Mississauga situation. Some of you will remember that a few years ago, there was an expansion team that was supposed to come to Toronto. They were announced about a year and a half out from when they were going to start playing. And I was really kind of surprised that we had a team announce themselves that far out. And then they pretty much went radio silent after that. And we didn't really hear from them again until a few months before the season started. When they talked with us again, they were all of a sudden not Toronto, they were Mississauga. And that team fell on its face. They had very few fans in the stands. The year after that, they tried to do a thing where they toured Canada and they played in multiple different arenas. And about a week before the season started, they gave up on it. They recognized it wasn't going to work. There was some issues with arena infrastructure, and that was the end of them. So a team that I thought had so much promise to it ended up being an utter failure. So I understand that just because a team announces itself, far out from when it starts to play does not mean they're going to be successful, which is why I think the league should have some requirements in place as to how that team spends that year. So now I think we are finally ready to talk about what my strategic expansion plan would look like for the league. And let's start off by talking about what I think the first step for the league should be. And to do that, I want to refer back to our reasons for expansion. The reason I want to focus on right now is filling in geographic gaps to help out teams with travel costs. This kind of goes back to my other point that the league should be focusing on stabilizing the teams that it currently has before it really focuses on expansion. I think this is kind of a nice crossover between the two of them. By filling in those geographic gaps, you are stabilizing the teams that you already have, but you're also expanding the league. So what I did was I looked at the map of teams that we currently have in the league, and I started to clump them together geographically. And I started to think that the best strategy here would be to think about the clumps that we already have as the base for divisions. And right now I see the base for 6 divisions across the league. I think the league should shoot to have 4 teams per division, just like the NFL does. And that is where my first phase of expansion comes into play. Because when you look at these 6 divisions, a lot of them don't have those 4 teams yet. So my first phase of expansion focuses on filling out those divisions. So let's go ahead and look at these geographic clumps that I believe are the base for divisions. I've taken the liberty to give these future divisions some names just so we're all on the same page. We'll start off with the future Eastern Division. And this division is actually already complete. We have Baltimore, Harrisburg, Utica, and Rochester in this division. Eastern Division, already complete, beautiful. Our next clump of teams is the future Midwest Division. This one is pretty close to already being a complete division. We've got Kansas City, St. Louis, and Milwaukee. One team short of being a complete 4-team division. We're going to fix that though with expansion. Moving on from that, we have what I call the future Desert South Division. This division needs some work. We only have 2 teams in it right now. We have Dallas and Mesquite. I know that I've said in the past, I think these 2 teams should merge operations under the Sidekicks name, but for the purposes of this exercise, we're going to assume they remain 2 separate operations. Next up, we have the future Mexico Division. Again, this division needs some work. We only have 2 teams in this one as well. We have Sonora and Monterrey. After that, we have the future Western Division, which again is not that far off from meeting that 4-team quota, because right now we have Turlock, Ontario, and San Diego in place for that future division. And then finally, we have a future division that needs a lot of work. We're going to be focusing on this division when it comes to expansion, at least for the first few years, because right now it only has 1 team. My future Pacific Northwest Division. Its lone inhabitant right now is the Tacoma Stars. I thought about putting Tacoma Stars in the Western Division and making that a completed division, just like the Eastern is already a completed division. But I think Tacoma is far enough away from those teams that it makes sense to have them as the seed for an entirely new division in the Pacific Northwest. Okay. So now we've taken the teams that we have and we've clumped them together and made them the base for 6 4-team divisions. Let's go ahead and fill out those divisions with some expansion. Starting in 2023, these are teams that will not play until 2024. We'll begin off by bringing the Wichita Wings up to the 1st division. The Wings have done very well, both on the field and off the field during their time in M2. I think they very much deserve to be an M1 team. Not only that, but they would also fill out our Midwest division and make that division Wichita, St. Louis, Kansas City, and Milwaukee. So Wichita comes on up to M1. Now keep in mind, one of my rules is that we'll only have 2 expansion teams per year. But since Wichita is an M2 team moving up, they do not count towards those 2 teams. So we still have 2 teams to play around with this year. And with that first expansion team, we're going to head on up to the Pacific Northwest. And we're going to start building that division up by adding a team in Boise. Boise has hosted some international arena soccer matches in the past, and if memory serves me correctly, they've done pretty well there. So it does seem like there's at least somewhat of an appetite for arena soccer in that market. So let's go ahead and put a team there and start to build up our Pacific Northwest division, which leaves us with one more expansion franchise to play around with in 2023. I thought about putting another team in the Pacific Northwest, but I do think it's maybe better optics for the league to spread out their expansion franchises a little bit. So instead of putting another team in the Pacific Northwest, we are going to fill out the Western Division by adding a team in the San Francisco Bay Area. This is a large population hub in the United States. It would be good for the league to take advantage of that. I also like the Bay Area because it's kind of a flexible term. It's a little bit vague. You have San Jose, you have Oakland, you have San Francisco there. So there are plenty of options for places that you could put a team there. And as I said, it would fill out our Western Division. Moving on to 2025, we have some teams here that will begin play in 2026. First of all, we're heading on down to Mexico. We're going to add a team to the Mexico division. That team is going to be Chihuahua. Chihuahua is going to move up from M2 into M1. But when they do that, and ideally before that, they're changing their brand. They're going to change their team name and they're going to change their logo. I don't think the team or the ownership group had any malintent in choosing the Savage name or the logo that they have right now, but there's no getting around the fact that it's offensive. And I think that for the league to be legitimate, you can't have a team with that kind of branding in it. So Chihuahua changes their branding and they move on up to M1. There are already some rumors that the team wants to do that as it is, so 2025, we're going to make that happen, bring them on up to M1. And because of my little rule that M2 teams coming up to M1 do not count towards expansion teams, we still have 2 franchises to play around with this year. With that first franchise, we're heading right back up to the Pacific Northwest. We're adding a team in Spokane. Now, I like Spokane because I think about their experience with arena football. They had the Spokane Shock there, I guess about 10 years ago now, in the Arena Football League. And that team did pretty well, at least attendance-wise, from what I saw. Now, as the Arena Football League itself ran into some issues, the Shock went away, but the team is being brought back right now in the Indoor Football League. So we'll see how they do, but I am cautiously optimistic that they will do well, and that serves as an indicator that Spokane has an appetite for these kind of weird niche sports such as arena football and arena soccer. So we're putting a team in Spokane and starting to really build up that Pacific Northwest division, which gives us one more expansion franchise to play around with this year. And that expansion franchise is going to go to El Paso, and that team's going to be added to the Desert South division. Now, I know the El Paso Coyotes didn't pan out so well in the end, but they did have a season in there where they were drawing pretty well. And I know that there's a chance a lot of those tickets were freebies given away by the owner, but I still feel like that with the right ownership group there, El Paso could be a good market for arena soccer. So we're going to give them another go and add them as an expansion franchise in 2025. Which brings us to 2027, and we are doing pretty well right now. All of our divisions have at least 3 teams in them, and a lot of them already have that 4-team quota that we are shooting for. So we'll begin off 2027 by bringing up another M2 team, the New Mexico Runners. This team has passionate leadership in place right now, and I think with 1 or 2 more investors, this team could really take off in their market. I'm hoping that will have happened by 2027, and we'll bring them on up to M1 and complete the Desert South division. And then with our first true expansion franchise, we'll go up to the Pacific Northwest and complete that division. We've gone from 1 team to a complete division now because we have added Portland. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not super confident in Portland as a market. I'm also not unconfident though. I don't really know what to think of Portland. My hope is that Portland is a city that is a little bit starved for sports. Yes, they have an NBA team, the Trailblazers. They have the Timbers in MLS. I believe they also have a junior hockey team, but they don't have much else. They don't have a minor league baseball team even, which blows my mind for a city the size of Portland to not even have a minor league baseball team. So I'm hoping that an arena soccer team could take advantage of some thirst for sports in Portland. And then finally, for our final expansion franchise in 2027, we're going to add the final piece to the puzzle to have 6 4-team divisions. We're going to add Mexico City to the Mexico division. Mexico City is a lot like Portland to me. It's a bit of a wild card. I don't know how it would go, but soccer is very popular in Mexico, and I think putting a team in the nation's capital is not the worst idea. Okay, so when we start play in 2028, because keep in mind those 2027 expansion teams will have to wait a year before they play. 2028 play begins, and we have 6 4-team divisions that are complete. And now that we have those divisions in place, and we have hopefully helped to reduce travel costs for the team, we can move into phase 2 of my expansion plan, which is where we truly expand the league's footprints to geographic areas where the league is just not represented at all right now. And again, for this, we'll think about it in terms of adding 4-team divisions. The way I look at it, there are 2 geographic areas where we could add 4-team divisions. We have the future Great Lakes division, and we have the future Southeast division. So we'll head on up to the Great Lakes in 2029, where we'll bring the Cleveland Crunch up from M2 into M1 to serve as the seed for the Great Lakes division. Cleveland looks like it has a lot of promise right now, and honestly, you could probably add them as an expansion franchise before this, but in terms of my strategic plan, which again is as much about thinking about where you should expand as it is about where you should not expand, Cleveland doesn't really fit in until we reach my phase 2. Of course, since Cleveland is the lone team in the new Great Lakes division, they're going to have to be incorporated into another division, at least for now. So for their first few years of existence, we're going to pop them in the Midwest division. In addition to Cleveland moving up from M2, we're also going to add a true expansion franchise in 2029. This team is going to serve as the seed for the Southeast division. But for this year, they'll play in the Eastern division. That team is going to be in Jacksonville. Now, I know some of you have described Florida as just a terrible place for minor league sports, and for the most part, I agree. But the Jacksonville Sharks, currently playing in the National Arena League for football, have done quite well down there. And just like with Spokane, I'm hoping that this is an indicator that Jacksonville has a market there for these weird niche sports such as arena soccer. So we're popping a team down in Jacksonville. Those teams begin to play in 2030, which brings us to 2031. First up for this year, we are going to bring Muskegon from M2 up to M1. Muskegon is another one of those teams that I think if they had 1 or 2 more investors could do pretty well. So we're going to hope that they're able to find some more of those investors and bring them up from M2 to play in M1 starting in 2031. Of course, I still don't think we're quite ready to formally establish our Great Lakes division yet. So just like Cleveland, Muskegon will be playing in the Midwest division for now. We'll also add a true expansion franchise down in the Southeast. Once again, looking at towns that have done pretty well with indoor football, we're going to add a team in Columbus, Georgia. Which brings us to 2033, where I think we finally reach a point where we can formally establish a Great Lakes division and a Southeast division, because we're going to add 2 teams, 1 to each of those divisions. First up, we're adding a team to Toledo. The Toledo Walleye are one of the most successful franchises in the ECHL. And the ownership group for this team, who I believe also owns the Toledo Mud Hens, has had interest in these kind of wacky sports in the past. They were planning to add an arena football team, the Toledo Bullfrogs, many years ago. Again, the league that they were going to play in kind of went belly up, so that was the end of the Toledo Bullfrogs. But maybe that ownership group would be interested in adding an arena soccer franchise. And honestly, considering how much the city has become invested in the Toledo Walleye, I think this could turn into another Utica situation where you have a city that loves their hockey team as well as their arena soccer team. So putting a team in Toledo, and that allows us to formally establish the Great Lakes Division. And then the location that will allow us to formally establish the Southeast Division. I know I keep coming back to this point, but in the Southeast, it's our best indicator. Another city that has done quite well with indoor football. We're gonna add Greensboro in North Carolina. So now we're really close to having 8 4-team divisions. And we're gonna reach that point in 2035, or when play starts in 2036, by adding a team in Fort Wayne, another town that has had a very successful ECHL hockey franchise, as well as a team in Richmond for the Southeast Division. I don't know why Richmond appeals to me. It could be a little bit of a risk, but geographically speaking, I think it works well for our Southeast Division. So I'm not going to talk through my final list of franchises, but I'll display it on the screen. One to reach play in 2036, we'll have 8 4-team divisions, and the league will be in a pretty good spot then. Again, this assumes that none of the teams we currently have fold, which is a big assumption and one that honestly is unrealistic. Also assumes that we'll find good ownership groups in those cities or in those locations. A lot of assumptions here, but this is my pipe dream of how the league will look going into 2036. But what about after that? Is the league done? I don't think so. I think after that, the league can enter phase 3, which is when the league really starts to expand its footprint. And the first part of that is going to be going down south to Central America and expanding further south that direction. Central America loves their soccer. Why not tap into that market? Put more teams down there in Central America and build the league up in that direction. But while you're going south, go ahead and go north as well. Canada, I know, has not had the best success with arena soccer franchises. But my hope is that if this league has really started to establish itself by the year 2036, there will start to be an appetite in Canada to have some franchises there, which will set them up more so for success than they have been in the past. So there you have it. My thoughts about expansion, why we should be expanding, the caveats and rules that should be in place, and finally a strategic plan for expansion. But as I said, the reason I made this video was to further the discussion amongst us fans about the future of this league as it comes to expansion. So I would love it if you all added some comments down below about your thoughts. Either do that on YouTube or do it on Facebook when we post the link there. I really want this to spark discussion amongst fans. And while you're doing all of that, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. This has been Alec with Inside the Arena, and I will see you all next time. Don't you just love it when you film like half an hour worth of footage and recognize you didn't have the camera on?